with the science. I turn to Steve Schmidt. Our viewers know you well. I'm just curious, big picture, Steve, how do you think the White House is doing? What is on your mind?
Well, I think the White House has done historically very poorly in this. This is one of the most significant crises in American history. It's certainly the largest American crisis of our lifetimes, and it's been the most inept response by the executive, by the president, I think, with regard to any crisis in American history, but certainly any crisis in our lifetimes. And we look at a president who is so clearly in over his head and out of his depth, who has been dishonest, who has been imprecise, who's been inaccurate, and whose deadly indecision will be paid for with the lives of tens of thousands of Americans as this virus escalated to a place it never need have gotten. And that is all because of the wasted month of February, where the president was hate tweeting, firing people that he was angry with over impeachment, going on campaign rallies, and golfing. And now the country is paying the price for that. And we should be careful to understand that when the same guy says, well, it'll be back in September, but we'll make it go away really quick, is the same guy, when there were 15 cases in the country, said soon it would be gone to zero and it would disappear like magic. The lack of credibility in these evening news events is epic and unlike anything we've ever seen. It's a Baghdad Bob show every night of the week, day after day, the airing of the grievances, the airing of his anger issues, the attacks on the governors we see every night, all of the qualities you never, ever want to see in a leader in a crisis when lives are at stake.
You lay it out there, and this is also a leadership test. Given that you know your way around campaigns and historically Republican campaigns, do you view the president's leadership and record on this virus as crucial to the 2020 campaign?
It's the essential issue. It's the only issue. Look, we're not talking about what I think is the defining image tonight, which is miles and miles long lines in Texas of people waiting for hours upon hours on food lines. These are people who never envisioned being on a food line. These are people who are hardworking, who were employed not long ago. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that these federal programs aimed at the little guy in this country, the small business owner, aren't reaching their targets. People can't get through the bureaucracy. They're ruled ineligible for it. The programs are out of money. The bottom line is 42% of the country has $400 of cash available, and it's not as if we didn't have a crisis of hopelessness and despair, a suicide epidemic, an opioid epidemic before any of this happened. But when you look at unemployment numbers that will rival and exceed the numbers from the Great Depression, you look at the jobless claims filed on a weekly basis, and essentially the job gains of the last decade all eradicated over the course of a month. You look at the protests and the insanity that you saw in Michigan yesterday. What you see looking ahead is political instability, perhaps, certainly economic instability. And the question for the country is, who is the person who is going to be able to get the country most quickly back on its feet? Who is the person who's going to unify the country? When we look now, we're sharing the largest common experience that any of us have ever shared, that's probably ever been shared in the history of humanity. There's literally no one on the planet who's not affected by this. And Donald Trump, who's divided the country for 3 years, says, I want to heal the land now. I'm the healer. It's a ludicrous proposition. And so I think that this election is as fundamentally an important election as we've had in this country since 1864, when we decided in that election if we were to be a country at all.
Wow. Well, you lay it out there. it's striking. We're going to put back up what you mentioned. We just we're showing viewers some of the photographs that we have here that are new in, and you brought it up because it's what people are feeling and living through. We have footage of the way people are living, the checkpoints where people are trying to get food, people in line 6 feet apart, long lines, heartbreaking devastation. We have people living through the pandemic and hurting. Then we have the people who, through no fault of their own, Steve, talk about a test of how we organize society, no fault of their own, end up out of a job. Households where both parents are out of a job, wondering about food, rent, and everything else week to week. The unemployment numbers that we got out today, as you mentioned, which is something that we wanted to get to in our broadcast, bring total unemployment to 18 million. Absolutely staggering. Absolute pain and heartache there again, which is a halo that far, far exceeds the number of people directly affected by contracting the virus itself. With all of that stacked up, that brings me to the other question I wanted to ask you, Steve, which relates to the two answers you've given us. And that is, what does this experience, which you said everyone's living through together in America, around the world, what does this do to people who are fact-based or evidence-based in assessing Donald Trump's core pitch when he ran for president, which, apart from all of the attacks on Hillary Clinton and what we remember in the politics of it, I think you know, and I think I will say in fairness, there are plenty of people out there who thought when they heard a business person say he would shake things up and bring a different sensibility to government, they may have thought, and some may say naively or incorrectly, but they may have genuinely thought, well, you know what? We've tried a lot of politicians. He obviously is going to be in office for the first time if he wins. Let's try something different. He said he would do that. He said he would bring executive leadership. He talked a lot about hiring the best people. As a political expert, do you think that this is also a reckoning for that core appeal, again, to those folks who follow this less, who may be less partisan, about how it's working out, his style of leadership? Where are the best people when you look at what has been documented in the New York Times and on air elsewhere as a lot of incompetence in handling this?
Again, the incompetence here has just been epic. And I think the one way to look at it is to imagine ourselves 50 years from now. Imagine we're old men and we're talking to historians trying to understand what happened in the era. And what we'll tell them is that in the year 2016, the American people very narrowly, losing the popular vote but winning the Electoral College, put a reality TV show host and a New York City con man into the office of President of the United States, who was unequipped intellectually, mentally, emotionally, and morally to be the commander-in-chief of the most powerful nation in the world. He didn't understand its history. He didn't understand its systems. He didn't understand its values. He spent years tearing the country apart, attacking vital institutions, alleging conspiracies, internalizing his grievances, conducting himself in an immoral and corrupt way that led to his impeachment. This has been a 3-year reality show circus, and hopefully what this incident will do is bring down the curtain on the reality show era of politics, all of it with finality. Because what we should understand, once again, is that politics and who we put into these positions of power matter profoundly. It is about life and death. And so we're in a life and death moment. And when you read the first drafts of history here and you know what happened, not what the president is lying about every night in these briefings and pretending happened, what really happened is this is one of the most inept responses to a crisis that you could have seen coming. People saw it coming. And as a result, the country has been devastated economically, and tens and tens and tens of thousands of Americans who otherwise would be alive will not. The coronavirus is the leading cause of death in America. He ran on a promise of making America great again. What we see is death, economic collapse, and suffering on an immense scale that nobody in this country could have imagined seeing in our lifetime 60 days ago. That's what his legacy is.
That is the word on that. Steve Schmidt bringing us his perspective and strongly stated. Dr.